My name's Babu Karkor. I actually come from West Africa, the Gambia. I work for our national water and electricity company called NAWEC. I actually came across Humanitarian Global in the internet, and I was really interested when I found they could do some training on water sanitation and hygiene. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised because when I came here, the training material, the lecture guide and everything was extremely beyond my expectation. Although it was very intensive and very, very tough. So every day I have to do a homework, which was really not easy. Closing at 5 o'clock and having to follow up with a homework wasn't very easy, but I think we have conquered it, and I am grateful. My expectations were met beyond imagination. The training was really detailed. The material and content were really wonderful, and I think everything was beyond my expectation. I've been given material, I've been given guidelines, and even this institution is trying to link me with people internationally who are interested in and doing what I am interested in doing also. My connection actually started when I flew into Kenya around 1 o'clock late at night. I found people of Humanitarian Global at the airport. These people were able to meet me at the airport, pick me up, and made me settle down late that night. And from there, I think it was just like a family. You know, everything went well. I really felt like home from home. Nairobi, frankly speaking, I can see Kenyan people are a very agitated people. They want to drive for development too much. But my advice to Kenyan people is Kenya is a beautiful country. You've got good education system. Your country is developing, and I can see a lot of young, talented people in Kenya. I think you have to at least minimize your aggressiveness. You are getting there. Advice is, frankly speaking, at Humanitarian Global, if you come to train with them, you really expect to have value for your money. The course facilitators are wonderfully landed. They will give you both the guidance, the information you might need with relevance, and they can even help connect you to other professionals there in the world. Thank you. I am pleasantly surprised that I could discover such wonderful knowledge in Kenya. I can't be but very grateful. And I don't think you guys owe me anything. Maybe I owe to come back again. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Nairobi, Kenya. It is exactly 11:02, and I'm glad to have you here. My name is Eric from Humanitarian Global. I'm the academic coordinator, and I will also be your moderator for the day. And welcome to this session for the disaster risk reduction and management essentials. With me, I have two people. One of them being Anthony, who is an academic registrar of Humanitarian Global. So I'd like to welcome him to say something small. And then that will be followed by our guest for the day, who is Marlene. So Anthony, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Eric, and also to all of our participants for joining the session today. My name is Anthony Mukui, the academic registrar at Humanitarian Global. We're very much excited to be hosting this session to make sure that we can also look into the area of disaster risk reduction and management. So just to give you a brief overview on who we are as an organization. So Humanitarian Global, this is an institute that focuses on capacity building. So that is what we focus on, and we target humanitarian professionals and also development professionals when it comes to capacity building. So we cover a wide range of areas, and these includes disaster risk reduction and management. We also make sure that we can tackle water sanitation and hygiene, monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. We also make sure that we can cover areas of food security and nutrition in emergencies, procurement and supply chain management, human nutrition and dietetics, and also maternal infant and young child nutrition. So we cover a wide range of thematic areas when it comes to humanitarian work and also development work. And this is the best place for you to be here so that we can get to train you. We can help you build your capacity. And we believe through our training, you're going to be empowered and also be better equipped when it comes to the role that you're playing in your organization. So welcome once again. And towards the end of the session, I'll be interacting with you so that I can take you through maybe some of the ways on how you can reach out to us when it comes to enrollment to a particular training. So thank you once again, and let me now invite Eric once again so that we can move forward to the agenda of the day.
Thank you, Anthony. And next we have our key speaker, who is Marlin. So before I invite Marlin, I'd just like to say a few things. If you have any question, you can always use the chat option or the Q&A to ask any question, and we are going to be here to answer them. If you have any question directed to Marlin, you can also use the chat or the Q&A section, and Marlin will be able to answer them. And so without wasting further time, I'd like to invite Marlin, who will start by introducing herself, and then she'll go right into the session for the day. Welcome, Marlin.
Thank you very much, Anthony and Eric, for that brief introduction about Humanitarian Global and about what we do. So I am Marlin Carrera Kenya. I train at the Humanitarian Global Institute. I train for MU and DRRM. And today I will be taking you through disaster risk reduction and management essentials, which are very key when it comes to handling some of the emergencies and disasters that happen on a day-to-day basis, because some of them are very unpredictable, especially when they are weather related or nature related. That is why we experience tsunamis, cyclones, flooding, landslides, and the like. So today, just a brief introduction of what we are going to be covering. Some of the things are understanding in depth more about the disasters and their context. Also, some of the risk reduction priorities, because they are there. Some other aspects that we are going to cover are things like leadership, especially in humanitarian settings or development settings, especially the ones that are related to disaster situations. We're also going to cover brief or needs assessment in disaster situations, because we all understand that disasters happen very prompt and they also require prompt actions. So another thing that we're going to cover today are the prioritization of needs, especially in emergency situations, and also look into some of the things that we need to consider during emergencies or disaster situations. There are also some aspects of how one is supposed to conduct themselves or work in emergency situations. And something that is always key is the food and non-food items. These are key things that are supposed to be distributed immediately after or during emergency response activities. So just to dive into disaster risk reduction, or DRRM as we call it. DRRM usually stands for disaster risk reduction and management. That is according to the UNDRR. And the terminology usually refers to the potential loss of life, injury, or reduction. That is the term risk, because these risks are the reasons why we have to respond. They're the reasons why we have to build resilience. So you find that this usually refers to the potential loss of life, injury, or destruction. Sometimes it is a matter of damage to assets and people's lives. Sometimes it's society, the community. And you find that these are due to things like hazards. So hazards are different. They are nature. Some of them are man-made in nature, and some of them expose people or make them vulnerable. And this limits their capacity or ability to cope with whatever situation they're going through. So in other terms, disaster risk reduction usually helps to identify or sometimes map out local capacities so that you can enable them to build resilience or cope with impending calamities or hazards. And that's why you find that disaster risk reduction approach usually helps us conduct effective disaster response, while at the same time also reducing the risks, the hazards, that similar disasters might reoccur in future. And once we build the resilience of these communities, we enable them to be able to tackle future disasters or emergencies. So diving deeper into disasters, as I said earlier, is the fact that disasters are usually very sudden. They occur very fast. Sometimes it's unexpected. But lately, I think we are more or well informed by early warning systems, meteorological departments that allow us to be a little bit more prepared. And you find that most of these natural events, especially that occur, usually result to either loss of life, loss of property, or sometimes even loss of livelihood. So, and that's why we usually focus on disaster risk reduction, so that we can reduce the loss of life, we can reduce the loss of property and resources, and we can reduce the loss of livelihoods. So disaster risk reduction usually is a step-by-step or a systematic process, which allows you to identify, assess, and reduce risk. And in most cases, it is usually time-bound. It usually requires you to do this at a very short period, especially when the disasters are occurring. That means that some people will have to respond. They will have to go save lives. They will have to ensure that those people are able to sustain life by giving them food, by giving them some of the non-food items, so that they can be able to cope with whatever situation they are undergoing at that very moment. So, and you find that it usually aims to reduce the social economic vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are some of the things that expose people to these hazards. Sometimes it is a matter of poverty. Sometimes it is a matter of inability to have the right information to cope with certain situations, or even the capacity or resources to cope with whatever is currently ongoing. For example, if it is flooding, some people are not prepared because you find some of them either are living near the riverbanks, and you find that it is not even raining where it's flooding. Maybe it's raining upstream. So they are just becoming vulnerable to the situation dependent on their localities. And you find that these are some of the aspects that you find or environmental or other hazards that trigger people's ability to be vulnerable. Sometimes it is a matter of not having the right resources to adjust or adapt. So that is why the main focus of disaster risk reduction and management is helping these communities build resilience so that they can be able to tackle future emergencies or disasters. So another important aspect is lately there are new or emerging factors that are happening to be very important. And some of these are things like climate change. So you find that climate change has resulted in the rise of temperatures, change of rainfall patterns. Sometimes it is the change of the sea levels, and that's why you find some things are affected by the nature of hydrometeorological disasters, such as droughts, due to prolonged seasons of sunshine. And sometimes it's a matter of floods due to prolonged rainfalls. And sometimes it is a matter of cyclones due to change of temperatures in the oceanic ground. So these are some of the things that are not foreseen. These are also some of the things that cannot easily be predicted, especially dependent on magnitudes. So you find that there is also the issue of ecosystem degradation. Lately, we have so many people trying to work on the environment, trying to plant trees. We are hoping to be able to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. There is also underlying factors such as conflict or wars. We are all hearing about the Ukraine war, and there are other wars. There has been wars, especially in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. And all these are some of the impending factors of disasters, because at some point they either result to people having to move from one place to the other, causing influxes in other countries. And you find that from time to time, these people need assistance to move, need assistance to cope. Sometimes they need food, definitely, to sustain their lives. And you find that there is also the issue of epidemics and the pandemics. And that's where the COVID-19 comes in, because this was one of the most unpredictable circumstances in current day, because at some point, no one could tell that almost governments will come to a standstill because of a flu. And you find that this has affected so many things. This has affected different livelihoods. People lost jobs. And in some areas, people are unable to even bounce back to whatever they used to be before the pandemic. And these are some of the things that are disaster-like, and they require people to give assistance. Sometimes it is a matter of, for example, the vaccine. They need more distribution to people who need them, and not many people can be able to afford them if maybe they are to be bought. So this is where some of the humanitarian and development organizations come in. This is where some of you as professionals come in trying to help people be able to acquire some of these very necessary services. There is also the issue of water scarcity. Water results to a lot of things. Water is life, as they say. So many people need water. We need water to cook, we need water to wash, we need water to plant. So water scarcity can result in disaster-like situations. There is also the issue of unregulated urbanization or population growth. And you find that this increases people's displacement, especially in terms of, for example, it even makes people vulnerable, because in these urbanized centers, that is where epidemics break. And you find that due to the density or the population density, you find that that epidemic or that infection spreads very fast, and that requires more people to come on board and be able to save as many people as they can, maybe even isolate some of these populations to avoid the spread. And you find these are very necessary things when it comes to disaster risk reduction and management. These are also some of the things that are important to take care of, because there is also the issue of vector control. When you're studying disaster risk reduction, you have to understand how people get affected and what are some of the things that you can do to be able to reduce these vectors or risk exposing factors to some of these people. So there is a lot of things that are emerging, especially when it comes to the issues of disaster risk reduction and management. And that is where a lot of things also come in, like urban planning. Some of this planning are very important concepts when it comes to the reduction of future risks. So there is also the concept of displacement. I know most of you are so familiar with displacement, because wars cause displacement. Sometimes the disasters, the natural disasters, the emergency, they usually cause displacement. Sometimes it might be internal, sometimes it can be, some people have to maybe go externally past their borders. And that is where the refugees and IDPs come in. These are people who have been displaced from their normal day-to-day activities, either because of fear or because of different situations that are related to conflict, ethnic conflict. Sometimes it's wars, and sometimes it is also the inability to cope with certain situations that they have been faced with. So you find that these events sometimes may be threatening or violent, leading to the death, destruction of environmental structures, sometimes property, death of livestock. And you find that some people lose their security, they lose their livelihoods. And you find these are important aspects, because everyone usually tries to find a better place for themselves and their loved ones. So, and that's why you find them moving from one place to the other, in fear that they will lose more people that they love, or they will lose more property, or they will also lose their lives. So depending on the triggering events, that's where you find some people either have to go beyond their borders, and that is they have to become refugees in other countries. And sometimes you find that some people end up being displaced within their own countries because of fear of going back, for example, to a region which is plagued with conflicts or ethnic conflicts or other reasons. So why do we usually focus on DRRM? Because DRRM helps organizations, it helps institutions, it helps individuals, especially those who are focusing on building community capacity to cope with, for example, different disasters or different situations that limit their ability to progress in life. So you find that in turn, this organization, these institutions, these professionals or individuals usually help or continually assist communities who are at a risk of either a disaster. For example, this is just an example because you find that people who are close to the ocean can be easily affected with things like tsunami, and people who are living along the riverbanks, especially downstream, are more likely to be affected by flooding. So these are just some of the examples of communities who are at risk of disasters or emergencies, because you never know when there can be prolonged rainfall. Sometimes it's unpredictable due to the change in weather patterns, and climate change is also affecting so many things. And you find that DRRM becomes very important for us to be able to help some of these communities withstand future occurrences of similar disasters or emergencies. And you find that since 2015, DRRM has been governed by the Sendai Framework. The Sendai Framework is an international document that was adopted by the United Nations members, and I believe some of you or most of you here belong to some of the UN member states. And that was done in between 14th and 18th of March at the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which was held in Sendai, Japan. And it was endorsed by the UN General Assembly as a guide to organizations, institutions, and individuals working in the disaster risk reduction field. So you find that that framework usually aims to achieve the substantial reduction of disaster risk and loss of lives, livelihoods, and health, and also in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets or persons and businesses, communities, countries, and that is going to govern the disaster risk reduction field for 15 years. That is between 2015 and 2030. In the Sendai framework, there are very specific priorities or priority areas that it is focusing on. And these priority areas is the understanding of the disaster risk, and that is where needs assessment really comes in. And you find that when it comes to emergencies and disasters, needs assessment is really time bound and should be done within the shortest time possible to be able to help in being able to set priorities. And the other priority of the Sendai framework is the strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. This is the strengthening of local capacities, the strengthening of disaster risk reduction institutions and organizations. And also the third priority is investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. As I said earlier, is the fact that in most disaster risk reduction activities, we focus on the development of local capacities. We try to enable them be in a position to tackle future disasters or emergencies. And you find that this also has a final priority, which is priority 4, which is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and also helping communities build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and sometimes reconstruction. Because after a disaster, it means that when you build, for example, houses, you're supposed to ensure that in case a future disaster happens, these houses should be able to withstand such weather conditions or extreme weather conditions. And you find that these are very important aspects when it comes to the Sendai framework. So all humanitarian and development workers who are working in the disaster risk reduction and management field, especially in the humanitarian sector, are usually governed by the Sendai framework. It has a lot of things that are very important when it comes to conducting disaster response activities, in conducting, in building resilience of communities. It also has priorities and responsibilities that humanitarian and development professionals have been tasked with. So as we continue thinking about why DRRM, we have the fact that in disaster risk reduction, the concept of resilience usually expresses only one goal of disaster prevention and response. So we find that in most cases, people try to save as many lives as possible. Sometimes we try to build resilience so that in future we might avoid either the loss of lives, like whatever that disaster is. For example, when it comes to things like tsunami, we will try to move people as far as they can so that in case this tsunamis ever happen again, you can be able to save more lives, or people might be in safer grounds. So you find that resilience is also closely connected to the concept of vulnerability. As I said earlier, vulnerabilities are the exposing factors. Things like poverty are exposing factors to people's ability to build back. For example, after disaster, we expect or we intend for people to be able to bounce back to their lives, but that is not that easy dependent on their ecosystems. One, it's because most people either lost their property, they lost their livestock, they lost their families. And in most cases, if they had a business, maybe that has been affected by this flood, you find that they do not have anything to build back their livelihoods. So you find that resilience is closely connected in helping these people be able to get their livelihoods back. So through the resilience, you find that sometimes we have to develop social system or build social systems while we try to figure out the best tools for analyzing the properties of those systems, so that in case we want to invest in helping them build back, we are going to be able to invest in the right things, invest in the right resources, give people enough resources that they need to be able to bounce back or have their livelihoods back together. There is also the issue of risk reduction, which is also an important factor when it comes to the reduction of vulnerabilities. This is trying to reduce the hazards, exposing different communities or individuals to risk, to disasters, to emergencies, because some of this can be limited dependent on your ability to detect them. And that's why we rely on early warning systems to inform us of any impending, for example, the meteorological department are going to be able to establish weather patterns, and they will be able to maybe advise on longer periods of rainfall or longer periods of drought. So these are some of the things that are very important when it comes to DRRM. And DRRM is the work of DRRM specialists or organization evolves around the concept of humanitarianism. And what is humanitarianism exactly? So humanitarianism is usually an active belief in the value of human life, whereby you find that humans practice benevolent treatments and sometimes they provide assistance to other human beings to reduce their suffering or to improve their conditions. And you find that sometimes it is a condition of humanity. Sometimes other people do it for the purpose of morality. Other people are just altruistic about it. And sometimes it's just logical reason of being a brother to or a sister to your fellow human beings. One aspect that involves voluntary emergency aid overlapping with human rights advocacy is also actions taken by government. Sometimes advocacy is a very key factor when it comes to the development professionals, and that's why you find that there is a lot of advocacy when it comes to the upholding of human rights. And you find that most of these are dependent on government funding, sometimes developmental funding, and sometimes it is domestic philanthropy. This is where you find that some people they find it like a calling just to help different people at different circumstances. That is why you find different organizations have different focus. Some people are focused on helping women, some people are focused on helping orphans, some people it's children, other people it's widows. And you find other people is persons who are able differently, and you find that all these are different humanitarian kind of beliefs, where we believe in helping each other be able to live a life of dignity. And you find that other critical issues sometimes include things like religious beliefs, because some people help because it is a govern of their religious beliefs. Some people believe that we have to help each other, and sometimes it's a matter of motivation. Some people either have gone through some challenges and have been able to realize the importance of helping one another. And that's why you find different people invest in trying to ensure that other human beings are in a position to live life with dignity. So humanitarianism focuses on assisting people to live a dignified life. And that's why it evolves around human rights. So talking about reduction of risk reduction, there are usually priorities that go in line with risk reduction. So one of the main, the first actually is focusing on the loss of life. Every time we have disaster reduction efforts or humanitarian efforts, while people are responding to a humanitarian emergency, you find that most people at first is focusing on saving lives. We focus on saving as much lives as possible, or trying to put people from harm. And then now that is where we focus on loss of property, because you find that there is a lot of people at that time who are losing either their land, losing their livestock, losing their loved ones, losing their houses and properties that are inside those houses. And you find that this affects people differently. And you find that sometimes it's also focusing on helping people not be in a position of losing their livelihoods, because that is their way of life. That is what they depend on to feed their day-to-day livelihoods, to feed their families, to work on their businesses. So this is a very important aspect. And that's why you find that times of disasters, organizations usually distribute non-food items and food items. All of these items are supposed to help people affected by disaster to save as much resources as they currently have and use them to build back their lives. And sometimes it is also to help them sustain their livelihoods, because you find that during those disasters, people lose their resources, people lose their money. And you find that at that time, they need it to be able to bounce back to their normal lives. And a concept of non-food items is the fact that it's usually used in humanitarian contexts when providing non-food items to those affected either by natural disasters or war, and that might be life-saving priorities. And that's why you find that from time to time, people will distribute food, people distribute blankets, people distribute buckets, water containers, cooking items, soap, sometimes mosquito nets and mosquito repellents. So you find that all these are aimed to protect different communities. These are the mosquito nets are meant to prevent the spread of malaria, of which you find that you might be trying to solve one problem, but find that people are being exposed to the other. So some of these efforts are usually meant to help the affected communities be able to live a dignified life as other humanitarian organization or governmental organization try to help them bounce back to their normal livelihoods. And you find that food and non-food items are usually dependent on the needs assessment findings. What do they have? What do they need? And what would be the most important things to distribute? And you find that food is quite a very tricky circumstance, because it also depends on some of the health regulations in whatever community you're targeting. So you find that during emergencies, a needs assessment is usually time bound, because you have to use very short timelines to collect information, to use that information to inform decisions, and use as little resources, because most of the resources should be focused on the emergency efforts or trying to help the community build resilience. So you find that this is a process that relies heavily on the collaboration of actors. These are dependent on who are the people who are responding, and that is where coordination really becomes a very important aspect. So you find that you have to coordinate your efforts. You have to map out the existing capacities on the ground, the organizations, so that you can be able to gather as much information. You're also supposed to rely on the local administration and the community stakeholders, the leaders. They're the ones who will give you the most important information. And you find that this information is very critical when making decisions to avoid the loss of resources. One, to also avoid misuse of resources, existing resources and funds. So you find that when it comes to needs assessment and analysis, you find that the decisions and related timeframes and information should always be defined before any secondary or primary data collection begins, because sometimes the primary or secondary data collection is dependent on if you have enough information to be able to respond to whatever issue is currently being addressed. And you find that failure of understanding is going to result to the wastage of time and resources. And you find that most of those resources needs to go into the disaster response effort or the resilience effort, trying to help these communities. And you find that an assessment also, you find that if you don't do so at the right time and also with the right information, you find that you're going to have an assessment that has been influenced by perceived information. And when you find sometimes communities reject aid, and this is because due to different circumstances, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's because they do not need it. And you find that that is a result of uninformed decisions. So if you do not do it the right way, you will also risk to an assessment that does not yield accountability to the affected population needs. And this is where you find that different aspects of accountability become infringed, because, for example, the donors are going to feel like their funds were wasted or their resources were wasted, or the community is going to feel that this assistance was not even worth, because maybe they would have needed food or they would have needed something else to help them cope. But at that point, you are not able to pay attention to their needs. So these are some of the important things that needs assessment helps to address, because needs assessment is where you gain the information that is going to help you prioritize the needs of the communities that you are serving. So you find that when it comes to the prioritization of needs, this is done after information has been gathered from the needs assessment. And one of the most prioritized needs is saving lives, then followed closely by sustaining life. So speaking about sustaining life, one, it depends on the distribution of food and non-food items. And you find that there is also the issue of wash. So water, sanitation, and hygiene access are usually a very important factor. This is because you find that water is needed. Water, as we say, water is life. People need water to sustain their lives to begin with. They need water to cook. They need water to clean. And you find that these sanitation facilities are also important because they need them. They need places where waste is properly managed to prevent the spread of infections. And then now, after you've been able to save lives and help sustain those lives, you need to also focus on helping them build back their livelihoods so that they can be able to continue a life with dignity. And that is where you find efforts such as economic empowerment come in, social empowerment, they come in. That is where you find that organizations come in to help the community build small businesses that they can rely on. And all this is in a way to sustain their lives and that of their loved ones. So some of the things that we really need to consider, especially during emergencies, one of them is the human right factor. So the precise meaning of the term human rights is a little bit controversial and subject to a number of philosophical debates, because different people have different beliefs, or they view human rights differently. One is because of the issue of culture. Sometimes it's beliefs, and sometimes it's even the communities that we have been brought up in, where you find that people are used to a certain way of life, and you find that there is either infringement, of which some people say that it is only infringement if the community feels so. But you find that as a humanitarian or development professional, you understand some of the main aspects of human rights. And you find that sometimes empathy is a very critical factor when it comes to human rights, because it's more about placing yourself in other people's shoes, trying to understand them from their point of view. If you are in that similar situation, what kind of support would you want? So it requires more of these leaders to be more empathetic, especially when dealing with situations on the ground. And that is why you find that there is a code of conduct. That is why you find that people are supposed to behave in a certain way. And there are so many documented code of conduct booklets trying to explain exactly how to deal with certain populations and what to do and what not to do. So you find that another thing to consider during emergency is differently abled persons, because you find that they are usually limited with their ability to move from one place to another. Sometimes it is a matter of being able to access the information that you have shared or the facilities that have been developed to help a specific population. And there is also the issue of older persons. We are all aware of the fact that older persons have a limitation when it comes to their energy. Some of them move slow, and you find sometimes their immunity is also affected dependent on different exposing risk factors. So you find that these are people who their immunity is not as strong as other people, and you find that they might be affected by very small things, and you also need to take care of them. Another important factor to consider during emergency is women and children, to ensure that their rights have been taken care of, to ensure that they have the right resources. If it is a matter of, for example, supplements or vaccines for children, you ensure that they are readily available, especially in disaster circumstances or situations, because you find that these are things that might affect their lives. There is also the issue lately of gender and ethnic minorities. You find that you can find that in a community, a certain ethnic population is not considered when it comes to some of their say and also their ideologies. So these are some of the things that you need to consider on the ground and be able to identify as soon as possible, especially during the needs assessment. We are also not supposed to take we are also supposed to take the physical factors and mental health issues very, very seriously, because you find these are things that affect different populations differently. You find that children might be exposed to traumatic events, and sometimes even not only children, but the general population might be subject to traumatic events that might affect their ability to do certain things. This might be due to the death of loved ones or something that just happened, and you find that their ability to cope with it psychologically is limited due to information or the support that they have received. So these are some of the things to consider during emergencies to ensure that your emergency efforts are effective. And you find that this is where leadership comes in. Once you're able to understand the human rights factor, you are able to understand the issues affecting the differently abled persons, the older persons, the women and children. You are able to have enough information to address the gender and ethnic minorities and also the psychological and mental health factors. You find that you might run an efficient response. So talking about leadership, you find that emergencies are very unpredictable and they require versatile leadership, someone who can be able to adapt and change strategies dependent on emerging information, and also, and you find that that is a very important factor when it comes to addressing different aspects of emergency, because your team is depending on you to be able to inform certain decisions. At the end of the day, they are also relying on you to be able to change strategy depending on emerging information, because as you're responding, you find that times are going to change. People are going to be able to learn, and they're going to be able to learn how they can contribute what they have towards the emergency response efforts. And that is why you find that some of the leadership is usually guided in some of the humanitarian and development professional documentations. And that is why you find that there is the core humanitarian standards which govern your efforts, especially during emergency. There is also the humanitarian principles. There is also the Humanitarian Charter. And you find that there is also the code of conduct, especially in dealing with disaster management. And you find that all this, they seek to guard the standards of behavior among different stakeholders. And you find that different stakeholders have different responsibilities when it comes to emergencies. And that is why I was saying about different people at the disaster management level, because you find that there will be people dealing with women, because organizations focused on women, organizations focused on the youth, organizations focused on children, some focused generally on wash of the population. And you find there are those who will also be focused on offering health services to those populations. Health services are also very important during the saving of lives, because some people might be hurt and require first aid. So you find that these are very important aspects to consider when it comes to your leadership during an emergency. And this is why you have to have the right information. You have to know exactly how to handle different circumstances, how to handle things like wash during an emergency, how to be able to handle things like health during an emergency. You don't require all the knowledge of a health professional, but there are those specific ones that you need to look into, especially when addressing such situations. Because before you find the time to call on professionals to help, you also need some background information on how to handle food and nutrition in emergencies. Because at emergency level, we have said that these are some of the aspects that require you to be very fast. Sometimes you won't even have time to, for example, hire the right people to help you deal with that specific emergency. So you find that you have to think very fast, and because your team is depending on it, the community you're trying to help is depending on it. And these are some of the aspects that become very important. So speaking about the Humanitarian Charter earlier, the Humanitarian Charter has three main principles. And as we were talking about human rights, one of the main human rights is the right to life with dignity. So you find that this right is usually reflected in the legal measures concerning the right to life, because to an adequate standard of living and to freedom from cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment, and sometimes punishment. And you find that an individual's right to life entails the right to have steps taken in order to preserve their life to begin with when it is threatened, and a corresponding duty on others to take similar steps. So, and that is why you find that when it comes to the right to life, most humanitarian and development organizations help people attain the right to life with dignity. And that is why you find that some of the development efforts are focused on the reduction of poverty, focused on access to quality education, focused on gender equality. So these are some of the sustainable development goals as we know them. So most of our work is focused on trying to build a life with dignity for the populations we serve. And you find that in addition, international humanitarian laws also make specific provisions for the assistance to civilian populations, especially during a conflict. And that is why you find that humanitarian organizations are given the opportunity to go and save civilians when their life is threatened. So these are some of the things that are very important when it comes to the right of life with dignity. Then you find the distinction between the combatants and non-combatants. So you find that this fundamental principle has been increasingly eroded over time because it was among some of the ones that were developed in the 1997 Geneva Conventions. you find that this was some of the additional protocols, and you find that this has developed over time, because at some point it was developed to help people, especially in wars or conflict circumstances. So you find that internal conflict, often referred to as civil war to a point, must not blind us to the need to distinguish those actively engaged in the hostilities and the civilians or others, especially including the sick, the wounded, the prisoners, who play no direct part in those civil wars. So these are people who are subject to receiving humanitarian assistance. These are non-combatants, as we call them, and you find that they are protected under the international humanitarian law, and they are also entitled to immunity from attack. Then there is one of the main and core principles that governs displacement situations, and this is the principle of non-refoulement. This, I think, most of you are well conversant with it, because it is the principle that dictates that no refugee shall be sent back to a country in which his or her life or freedom would be threatened on account of either race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, or where there are substantial grounds for believing that he or she would be in danger of being subject to torture. So these are some of the things that are in the Humanitarian Charter that focus or that govern disaster risk reduction and management efforts, especially in disaster and emergency situations. So in order for you to be able to handle this emergency, there are 5 key traits that you need to look into, even within yourself as a leader in the humanitarian context, because from time to time, people are sent, and you find that at some point, you might be the only one who has been sent with a team to lead an emergency effort. So these are just a few, and definitely not exhaustive. There are more traits to a good humanitarian leader, but one of the main ones is empathy. You being able to place yourself in the shoes of those suffering or of those affected. And you find that empathy usually guides how you treat others and how you treat your team. So being able to understand things from their perspective is a very important leadership trait. And there is also the issue of being open-minded, ensuring that your team and other people can be able to correct you if you're wrong, or point out some of the things that they may feel that if done differently might be able to help somewhere. So being able to allow people to contribute towards the decision-making process is also an important factor of open-mindedness. So you need to also be a good communicator. You also need to be very clear when giving instructions, and also need to be very clear on telling people how things are. So your team is among the people that you are supposed to communicate with very effectively, so that they can be able to assist your efforts and be able to understand why they are doing certain things the way you have instructed them to be done. So good communication is a very important factor when it comes to each and every aspect of humanitarian work, not only disaster reduction and response, but any humanitarian and development work requires you to have this specific trait. Another thing is being able to adapt to new information as it comes, adapt to different environments. So you find that from time to time, you might go to very extreme environments, and you find that these are not your usual environments. So how easily are you able to adapt to those places? How are you able to ensure that you're using the right resources in the right way and trying to use whatever information comes in to inform decisions before you make them? You also need to be a very good stress and time manager, because you find that sometimes things like saving lives are dependent on time, and they need to be done as fast as possible. Sometimes you find that some of these extreme environments that you will go to might cause stress, might cause fear, might cause anxiety. So you also need to know how to take care of your own self when it comes to addressing some of these issues. yes, there are some situations that you go and you are going to be scared, but how do you take care of such situations? How are you able to maintain your cool and lead your team effectively? You're not, because we are all human, it's not that you're not going to be able to fear, because some of these environments are hostile. Some of these environments might cause harm. And you find that from time to time, you need to figure out the best ways of coping with such circumstances and such situations. So with that information that we have shared, that is just a brief of what you can gather up from some of the courses that Humanitarian Global offers, especially when it comes to disaster risk reduction. Some of those issues, especially things like wash in emergencies, health in emergencies, food in emergencies, are covered in depth when we go into the course. They even give you some of the insights that you can use on your day-to-day work. They also get into detail on how you can use some of the core humanitarian principles in your day-to-day work, how you can use the code of conduct, how you can build yourself to be a better disaster risk reduction manager, or someone who can be able to inform some of these decisions, because we find that risk is not only in emergency kind of situation. Sometimes risk is also an important factor when it comes to project management, to avoid the loss of resources, to ensure that you're running effective programs. Some of the things such as gender responsive approaches, they are not only applicable when it comes to the disaster in the emergency situation, they're also applicable when doing or conducting other projects, other initiatives. And you find that for the disaster risk reduction as a course, you need to go in depth into understanding some of those situations so that you can be able to understand how you can be able to respond promptly. Because as I said earlier, emergencies sometimes are unpredictable. Like the COVID-19 pandemic was very unpredictable. Many people didn't know how much it would affect the livelihoods of so many people, so many institutions. And you find that at the Humanitarian Global, we offer two main courses in disaster risk reduction, and that is the certificate course and the diploma level or advanced certificate course. So at the certificate course, you are going to, it's an intermediate level. That is for people who want to venture into disaster risk reduction and management. And that is where you are taken into understanding deeper on what DRRM is. What is the significance of it? What are some of the emerging trends when it comes to DRRM? And then you briefly go through the history of how far disaster risk reduction has come up to this point that it is. So that requires you to go through the milestones in the history of disaster risk reduction, some of the assistance in case of natural disasters. Then there is the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, which have led to disaster reduction as it is right now. There is also we get into comprehensively understanding some of the terms that you will use on a day-to-day basis and where to use them. There is also the disaster risk and risk assessment. That is where we have to go through the types of disasters. We go into broader aspects of disaster management. There is also the risk assessment because it is an important factor. And there is also the steps to consider in risk assessment. And you find that there are also other steps to consider in risk assessment that are out of the normal listing. So, and then we go to the DRRM diploma course, and that is where we get in depth. These are for people who are already in the disaster risk reduction field, and they have a background on how they have been implementing some of these strategies. And that is where you find that we start by introducing ourselves into the gender-based DRRM, because lately there is a lot of issues, and you find in every organization there is a gender specialist just to take care of such issues. So you're also supposed to go into understanding some of the elements of gender-based DRRM and the gender analysis. The gender analysis questions are also covered to help guide your work when asking yourself questions about your project. And that is why we also dive deeper into the gender issues and gender equality issues. Plus, we also have a broad look onto how you can implement a gender responsive approach when it comes to your projects. There is also the DRRM frameworks, as we have mentioned one earlier. So we dive deeper into understanding of frameworks, not only the DRRM frameworks, but the process frameworks, the legal frameworks. And then now we go into understanding how the Sendai framework came about. And that is where we go through the Yokohama strategy. We look at the Hyogo framework for action, the HFA, and then we get into detail with the Sendai framework, that is understanding the global targets, understanding the guiding principles, the priority areas and the roles of stakeholders, of which as an organization or as a professional, you are among the stakeholders. And you find that these are some of the very important aspects of it. And then we go deeper into the issue of displacement. And you find that when it comes to displacement and emergency situation issues, we have to understand the concept of displacement, where we tackle more on the refugees and the IDPs. We tackle more on the humanitarianism aspect, look at what exactly in emergencies and other considerations. We dive deeper into issues of food in emergencies. That is why we tackle food security, food control, the food safety and nutrition. And there is also the issue of health in emergencies. And that is why we tackle the health systems and infrastructure and how to set them at those specific environments. And then we also look at the control of communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases. So as we continue deeper, we dive into how to set up a response. So we have to better understand the concept of disaster management and the disaster management cycle. And we have to look into the core humanitarian standards that govern such aspects. And that is where we now dive into the response process, which includes a very important in terms of coordination, in terms of needs assessment and analysis, in terms of strategy and program design. And you also have to look into the implementation. Yes, you have planned already and you know this is what you want to do. How do you implement it? And then there is always the important aspect of monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning in such a process to guide you on being able to monitor the use of those resources to ensure that some of the activities that you're doing on the ground are meeting the targets that you are intending on meeting. And for that, we have the certificate, which is at a beginner level, and it goes for 3 months, and it costs $500. And we have the diploma, which is an intermediate course. It goes for 6 months and costs $1,000. And something is that if you enroll during this period, we have the 10% off discount, and that means that you will pay less 10%. So we always look forward to having you. And at this segment, we are going to welcome question and answer segment. So I will call on to Eric.
Thank you, Marlon, for taking us through. I can see a few questions on the Q&A. Don't know if you're there with me, Marlon. There is a question from Dinka. And then I think I also sent you a few questions on your DM. You can also go through them.
Thank you very much. So I will just read out Dinka's message out loud. So she's appreciating the way of presentation and has mentioned one of the issues that are taken into consideration during emergencies, the ethnic minorities. So in context, ethnicity is a main challenge, especially in our context. So may you clarify the way we consider ethnic minorities in emergency? One thing that we really consider in that aspect is the fact that in most cases, ethnic minorities fear participation, either because of stigma or stereotype dependent on the community that you're dealing with. So to ensure that some of these people are heard, because that is the main point of having the needs assessment, is to ensure who belong to that community and giving them the opportunity to also share their views, and also ensure you also involve them in the participation so that they can be sure that some of their aspects are also being considered. So when it comes to the ethnicity challenge, we all believe that different communities have different people from different ethnicities, and it is also very important to consider the people who are least given attention. And that's where you find that when it comes to needs assessment, you do not only look at the people who are the loudest, but you also seek to understand what the people who are most silent have in mind. So those are also some of the things to look into when conducting a needs assessment when it comes to different populations. I don't know if I have been able to answer your question.
Thank you, Marlene. I can see a question from Osman Ture on the Q&A.
Yes, when it comes to the core humanitarian standards, it is related to the Sphere Handbook, because that is the one that has some of the most important aspects to consider when it comes to humanitarian and development work. So they're also covered there very well. Plus, there is also the core humanitarian standard organization that also share a handbook in different languages, dependent on how you, dependent on which you find easier to understand. So there is always more information when it comes to the core humanitarian standards.
Thank you for that, Marlene. I can also see another question. Let me read it out. Please clarify what relation will be needed in an area of war affected. In an area of war, since there is looting of medicine and USAID food items, how can we manage such a case? That's a question by Yimer.
Thank you very much for that question. So when I talked of collaboration and coordination, one of the things that you're supposed to really identify during the needs assessment is who are the people on the ground. And that is where we map out local authorities. And you find local authorities at some point help, and sometimes you have to figure out, for example, as you said about people looting medicines, there are different strategies of storage. But as I said earlier, the community only loots if you do not involve them in some of these processes. And once they're able to understand the importance of some of these things, they will be among the people who even protect and come to you with information. So community involvement is a very important factor, because they still things that sometimes they still think that they do not understand could harm them. And sometimes they still things that they do not understand can help them. So when I talked about communication, communication is a very important aspect, and being able to map out the right people during such an important, for example, emergency or aid, dependent on where it is being given. It is very important for you to think of involving the community, one, and involving local leadership and authorities to ensure that whatever aid you have is safe.
Thank you, Marlene. I can see we have a question from Oliha Edward. If you may allow me to read it. What are the major challenges in mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in the development context?
There are very many challenges, especially when it comes to mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and climate change, because in some cases you find that they are not related, and in some other cases you find that they are very related, dependent on the disaster that you're dealing with. So for example, things like urbanization leading to the spread of pandemics, that is not related to climate change adaptation. So you find that dependent on whatever you're focusing, one is ensuring that the information is being understood and the efforts are also being understood by the populations you have to serve. So one major challenge is miscommunication, where the communities you want to participate do not understand what their role is. And you find that there is also the issue of addressing exactly who you want to participate in those efforts. So it is always very important. And I think the humanitarian and development work now is really focused on, it's really focused on being able to share the right information, to also share or being able to provide the right resources. Because as I said earlier, you might take things to people that they don't need. So at that point, even if you're bringing them information or you want to mainstream something, they will be among the first people to reject it. So it's also very good for you to be able to understand the population and learn how, or find an entry point or a gateway of involving them in deriving those solutions, so that you can be able to help them understand and implement some of the things that you have in mind. I see a question here by James Kihika. I believe how best can the issue family linkage be resolved? I believe it's one of the factors that cause trauma and mental health to the affected communities. This is a very important factor, and you find that's why lately we have organizations focusing specifically on that. And you find that there is also a branch of the UNHCR that tries to help families who are displaced in such situations come together. So you find that in most cases, once the efforts either have toned down or people have different people at different places where, for example, people are being relocated, you find that it is important for you to be able to, you find that it is very important for you to ensure that you're able to know where all the, for example, if it is the relocation sites, where they are, and at least have a contact to that site, and also ensure that you're able to gather enough information so that in case even someone wants to look at the kind of people who are in the other field, you share as much information to show them that these are your people, this is where they are. As soon as these efforts have been finished, you're going to help you get in touch with them. So that is also a very important aspect, as you said. And you find that in most cases, different organizations just focus on that. So in most cases, it's also ensuring that different organizations know their exact roles. And you find that it will be easier for you to be able to link different family members at different sites, and also be able to understand where or how their people are, which is going to bring them a little bit of comfort.
Thank you for that, Marlene. I think I can also see another question from Margaret Kelly, as you also work on answering some of the participants whose hands are up. So Margaret is asking, is risk assessment and analysis steps same for the natural disasters, i.e. floods affecting the natural environment, destruction of infrastructure and human lives?
The risk assessment are general for being able to analyze different disasters, not only natural ones, but there are step-by-step analysis steps that you can take to analyze different risks at different levels, including even project level. So these are some of the things that might guide the process. So the risk and the analysis steps are one that help guide the process of identifying the risk.
Thank you, Mali. Maybe one last one before we go to the hands that are raised. So I have Fatima Eden asking, what are the possible solutions for IDPs living in urban areas where there is no enough space to dig latrine and other waste management mechanisms?
When it comes to different organizations, they are mobile facilities dependent on the management. But you know, when it comes to mobile sanitation facilities, they require a lot of management because of having to declog them or trying to manage them, and also ensuring that they are clean and able to use. So one of the things that is usually used is the mobile sanitation facilities to ensure that they at least get some of the most important facilities to use at that specific time, dependent, especially when it comes to urban settings. I totally understand there might be challenge of there might be a challenge of kind of digging a pit, but you find that in urban settings there are also drainage facilities, so you can find a way of trying to ensure that even if you build a mobile clinic, it is directly connected to the drainage system to avoid the spread of vectors that might cause infections.
Thank you. Can maybe the last one? We have Bare Ali asking, what kind of frameworks are followed by institutions or agencies in implementing disaster risk reduction and resilience education among schools?
When it comes to specific, the Sendai Framework usually governs the general disaster risk reduction efforts and resilient efforts. When it comes to things like education, you find that UNHCR has some booklets or frameworks to help govern some of when it comes to education access. And you find that even there are other organizations that deal with children and education. And if for example, UNICEF, and you find that these are very important. You find that these are very important handbooks when it comes to understanding how to deal exactly with building, implementing disaster risk reduction and resilience education among schools. So some of them are also localized. So dependent on exactly where you are, you find that there are some education manuals governing either developed by your government and which are more appeal to more local kind of settings. So dependent on where you're working, there are usually a number of handbooks to govern some of the aspects that you're focused on. For example, even if it is food and nutrition, even the health aspects are usually governed by different ministries of health on how to distribute food, on how to control vectors. So these are some of the things that are localized in context, because different communities might have different factors, including different risk factors.
Thank you, Marlene. I can still see a few more questions. I have somebody asking what approaches could be effective in implementing DRRM in urban setting, and also somebody else asking the best approaches of DRRM implementation.
Some of these approaches have been covered very well in some of our course, though you find that when it comes to urban settings, there are very specific aspects dependent on the population, because you find that there are urban settings that have so many people, and you find that some of them, you also need to address the issue of congestion and whatever needs they have. So dependent on the setting and the existing factors, you can always develop mitigating factors for those specific issues. So when it comes to urban settings, there are a lot of factors, and you find that it depends. But one of the main factors when it comes to addressing urban settings is the planning factor. Being able to plan using limited resources, one, and also being able to use the population to mitigate some of the factors. That is, you might find different people have different capacities, so you can use some of those capacities to be able to help those communities build back. So one thing is always assessing the resources that are available at the community level or at that specific institutional level, or sometimes even family or individual level.
Thank you, Malin. I can still see a few more questions. We have an Ahmed Hussein asking, what are the main causes of environmental disasters in Africa? And we also have another question that states, which disaster made more hazard, man-made or natural disaster? Let me repeat the question. So we have two questions here. The first one being, what are the main causes of environmental disasters in East Africa? And also another person is asking, which disaster made more hazards? Are they the man-made or the natural disasters?
Lately, we actually call them complex disasters. You're not able to identify exactly whether they are man-made or they are naturally made. And sometimes it is a matter of man-made activities that result in, sorry about that, technical issues. So I think when it comes to complex disasters, sometimes there are as a result of man-made activities. So you find that when it comes to like climate change, some people have said that it is a result of cutting trees and depleting some of the natural resources that human beings rely on. So sometimes when it comes to issues like climate change, it's a man-made / natural combination of factors.
Thank you, Marlene. I think I can see one more question. Let me read it out. With the current frequency appearance of disasters, what could be the possible solution for mitigation measures, especially in the Horn of Africa?
First of all, I have to say that there is a lot of things that are currently ongoing when it comes to mitigation measures. One, there is the great advocacy that is ongoing on, a lot of people are advocating for the planting of more trees, especially the ones that have been depleted over time due to people depleting forest areas to settle or to create settlements. So one is that, and then there is also the issue of trying to restore the already degraded, especially like drought kind of areas, because lately there has been different change in the weather patterns, which some of the experts are saying that might be of favor if used well. So if we can be able to use the rainfall maybe to plant crops, it might even boost our food security. So these are just some of the efforts. And I think lately the Horn of Africa has a very well-informed early warning system, which is helping a lot of organizations and humanitarians and even governments be able to plan on how to best respond to disasters. And you find that lately there is a lot of communities have been able to build resilience. So those are just some of the factors that are currently being done to help mitigate the climate change and disaster issue. So you find that apart from drought in very many different areas, which is also trying to be handled by different humanitarian and development actors in direction to kind of build food security in the region, you find that it is also important for other actors to come up with more innovative ways. For example, the distribution of drought-resistant seeds to be able to restore some of these ecosystems.
Thank you, Marlene. I can see a few more questions. Somebody is asking what is internal and external displacement.
So when it comes to displacement, displacement is a result of conflict or natural disaster. So when it comes to internal, it is where we refer to the IDPs, internally displaced persons. They are actually within still their country borders, just not in their localities. They have been displaced due to one reason or the other. It might be an emergency or it might be war or conflict. When you talk of external displacement, it's more of refugees, people having to be forced out to outside their borders. That is borders that define their territories, for example, a country. So external displacement is once people have been able to migrate past the borders and they end up being refugees in a different country other than the one where they were born in. So that is external displacement, while internal is you're still within your borders, just not where you are used to your normal livelihood.
Thank you, Marlene. I think now we can proceed to a few hands that I've seen raised up. We have Jama. Jama, are you there with us? Samuel, are you there with us? You can unmute your mic and speak. Samuel Paul, kindly unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. And I really appreciate the presentation, especially it is something which is really very critical, and it helps the advancing interventions which can be able to help and scale especially the vulnerable communities. Now, my simple question is just on a bit of a needs assessment and analysis. I think it is very critical that a needs assessment is conducted, especially when an intervention is supposed to take place. But now I wanted to understand, how can the community be strongly encouraged to take up this bit of initiative? Because you find that the community is not sometimes bothered of that the relevance of the needs assessment. I just wanted to understand how to strengthen a bit of a community responsiveness in taking up like doing the needs assessment. Thank you.
We find that it is important for them to know why you're gathering that data. And that is what allows them to give some of the most important information. So one thing that people fail to do is making the community understand why it is important for them to cooperate during such efforts. Because in most cases, humanitarian professionals go to the field and want to act like professionals, but it is important that you go there and try to act as a collaborator, trying to show them that they are part of these efforts. Otherwise, they will deny you the kind of information that might be very important for your efforts. So in order for you to be able to build their capacity, they need to understand why their capacity is important to be built, because you have to show them why it is important for them to be able to build resilience, because in future this might happen and maybe the team that is currently on the ground will not be there. So this is also important for you to make them understand, and that is where you bringing them on board becomes a very important aspect in showing them that it is important for them to learn these skills. It is important for them to share this information that is very important when it comes to helping their communities. So when you use them as an equal, or you show them that they're an equal to these efforts, most of them will be very responsive when it comes to giving the information that you need, and also attending some of those training because they understand why it is important for them to earn and learn whatever skills and information that you're sharing. And with that, they're also going to share with you some of the important information that is critical towards your response activities.
Thank you for that, Malin. I can still see a few more questions we had not answered. I think this one is a repeat, it's okay. Oh yeah, somebody is asking, what are the major gaps to address DRRM?
One is the main one, which is the information gap. A lot of people want to contribute towards this effort. A lot of people want to help mitigate risk, but they don't have the right information to do it. They also don't have the right resources to do it. And you find that it is also a very important factor to focus on gathering the right knowledge, skills, and resources to be able to tackle such issues. So one of the gaps is the knowledge and resource gap. Some people say that DRRM activities are sometimes underfunded unless an emergency strikes. But now that you are professionals who know better, you can invest in learning so that when such a situation comes in or some of these efforts are required, you're in a position to offer them.
Thank you, Marlene. Do we have any other raised hands as we continue to answer more and more questions? I think I can see a question here. Let me read it out. What is being planned to reduce drought problem in East Africa that is getting worse from time to time and getting bigger and bigger in magnitude?
So as I said earlier, it's the issue of different organizations or humanitarian actors trying to come and offer the drought resistant seeds to fast rehabilitate some of those already degraded regions. And you find some of the regions that are being affected are they are not densely populated. And you find that from time to time, there are no people to take care of those resources. So in most cases, different organizations are trying to come in to help build back those lands so that they can be able to ensure food security, because drought also threatens food security. So it's also a matter of having the right humanitarian and development actors working on the issue of food security.
Thank you for that, Marlene. I'm trying to look for any other question that we have not answered. Bara, you can unmute your mic and ask the question or make a comment. Bara, are you there with us?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
How are you? Thanks. I've sent a question and you have answered already. That was it was about the frameworks on education issues, and I was listening that UNHCR and also UNICEF are more active on this. So there was a suggestion that I have sent. I don't know if you have seen. Have you seen?
Come again. You can just explain it. Feel free.
So one, it was just thanking about the expertise and abilities and knowledge you are sharing with us is very important. And the DRRM very important, and even it's very rare to get skills. But I know little who understands about DRR know the importance of it. So my suggestion was, It's about of certificate of participation. If you can provide, this will help. I'm sure it will help to make more awareness of the humanitarian global.
Thank you very much for that feedback. And we hope that we can always be of value to you and others out there who might need this information. And we are also very humbled with your feedback. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Henry, I can see your hand is up. Are you there with us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, my question would be to the panel. What effects of urbanization, and more so in reference to Kenya, where I know that a lot of land has been put to real estate around the capital city of Nairobi and other major cities. So what effect does this have to food security, for example? And I know that it could be happening in places like Addis also and other major cities in the Horn of Africa. Thanks.
So urbanization is always a threat to food security, just like deforestation is, because of use of land that would have been otherwise having crops. But one thing that the government of Kenya is doing is trying to ensure that the food that comes to Nairobi comes from the other counties. And that's why they wanted to establish Nairobi as an urban hub or commercial hub, while it relies on the other counties that are well versed with issues of agriculture. And that's why you find there is the issue of more devolution funds kind of trying to go into agriculture and more localized farming kind of innovations. So one thing that at any point that you use land for example, the development of real estate and urbanization, there is always a threat posed to food security. But this is just the aspect where you find that it is also very important for us to think of other aspects of trying to invest on other agricultural feedback to feed the Nairobi like commercial hub, which it intends to be.
Okay, thank you. And maybe my last question would be, do you have like online courses or things like that?
Yes, actually, most of our courses are offered online, different courses. I think someone is also going to share our website on the chat so that you can also visit our website and see some of the courses that we offer online. Last, we also offer on-site training dependent on the availability of participants. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that comment. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Thank you, Marlene, and thank you, Henry. Ymer, are you there with us? Ymer? So as we wait for Ymer, if you have any other questions or comments, you are allowed to post them on the Q&A on the chat. We'll be here to answer them. That pertains DRRM or just Humanitarian Global as a whole. And one of us will reach out to you either on the chat section or on the Q&A, and we'll have your questions answered.
Hello.
Yes, Ymer.
Hello.
Hello, I can hear you.
Hello. Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I attended last week and today. Your the lecture was fantastic. I appreciate it, both of the lecturers. I can add some information, especially in disaster risk DRR case. There should be emergency plan every locality, every local district. So if there is a emergency plan, the plan should be contain resource, human power, time, and money. There should be these activities are done before the emergency case, because in emergency case, there should be emergency plan. After emergency, that emergency plan will help the save life, because the emergency plan should be technical or managerial. The managerial especially allocate budget. The technical, especially in health sector, avail emergency drugs, water, hygiene, and sanitation facilities. So these are the main gap in during emergencies that I have seen in the last war, the war of TPLF in our region, in Wollo, Ethiopia. So there should be emergency plan and resuscitation program in emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Emir, for that. I'll allow Marlin to maybe comment on that.
Thank you very much, Emir. That is true, actually, the emergency plan, but the emergency plan should also be informed by decisions and also needs assessment data, so that you can be able to minimize the misuse of resources also, as you said earlier. So there is also the issue of planning dependent on information and dependent on the needs, and that is what goes into the emergency plan. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
I think as we wait for Mwale, you can see one more question. What are the ways of preventing disasters from agricultural activities in a rural setting?
It is dependent on what kind of disasters those are. Actually, most of the agricultural activities, unless they're causing harm to the environment, they are supposed to be a direct positive result when it comes to food security. So I think that is something that maybe you will clarify on what kind of disaster exactly, maybe resulting from agricultural activities, and then maybe we can pick it up from there. But in most cases, agricultural activities are meant to reduce disasters because they also address a direct positive when it comes to the tackling of food security, especially even in supplying emergency situations with food. So maybe you can clarify that, Musa. What kind of disasters from agricultural activities in rural settings are you like looking at?
Thank you, Marlin. Fidelis, Marlin, are you there with us? Any other participant with a question or comment? James, are you there with us? You can unmute your microphone.
Eric?
Yes, James.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric and Marlin, for the good presentation. I've been following quite well, and mine is just a concern. I possibly need your clarification. I applied for one of the courses, especially that is DRRM, and I was intending to start next week on Monday, but due to some difficulties, it may not be possible. I don't know how it can be extended or these courses are available. Thank you.
Anthony, will you kindly help James?
Okay, thank you, James, for the question, and I'm sorry for the challenges that you faced when it comes to your process to enroll with us. So you can write us an email, and then we're going to have our sales team follow up with you so that they can guide you further on how you can have your training slot reserved, so that once you're ready to commence, you'll be able to go on with your course.
Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome, and thank you for the question.
Thank you, Anthony. Just as a reminder, we shall be sending the slides and the recording for this session. I have seen emails, and we are going to get back to that after the session is done. I think at this moment, with no further questions, I have seen one question before we cross over. A question from Chris, who is asking who is supposed to conduct a DRR assessment. Marlene?
So Christian, thank you for your question. In most cases, DRR assessment is usually conducted by DRR professionals or the segment in a project that is in charge of that specific aspect. So those are the kind of people who are supposed to conduct the DRR assessment, dependent also if it requires any further, for example, assistance or expertise. For example, if it is an environmental factor, it requires what needs to be informed. If it is environmental kind of issues, they can be conducted by environmental experts. For example, if it is health, it can be conducted by health experts. But if it is just the general disaster risk reduction assessment, it can be conducted by disaster risk reduction and management professionals.
Thank you, Marlene, for that. And at this juncture, I'd like to invite back Anthony, just to guide us through who Humanitarian Global is, and just maybe to give us more details and information. So welcome, Anthony.
So thank you, Eric, and to all of our participants for following up with our session today. So I believe it has been an informative session, and we have been able to learn quite a lot, and there's always a room on how you can further your training in this particular area and also other areas when it comes to some of the areas that we train on. So what I've shared on the screen, that is the website, and this is where you can find more information when it comes to all these programs that we offer. So the web address for the Humanitarian Global Institute, that is www.humanitarianglobal.com. So that's where that is the address for the website. And once you go to the website, this is the home page, and we've made it very easy and for you to maneuver as you find the information that you're looking for. So you might be interested in a certain course, so that means you can go to the category of training and learning. So this is where we have put all the training programs, and we've been able to categorize them. That means for those who are asking in regard to the online courses, you can find them here in different levels as well. We also offer capacity and team building to our participants and also organizations. So you can always reach out to us in case of that kind of engagement that you'd like with Humanitarian Global. Also through the pool of experts who work with us as the trainers and also the consultants, we are able to offer consultancy services to support you as an individual and also as an organization. We also plan for events like the one that we had today, that is a webinar event. We also organize for on-site training, and that means very soon you're going to be having the calendar here for the on-site training. When it comes to the application process, so how do I register for a certain course? So I'm going to give you an example on how you're supposed to go about the registration process. Once you come to the website, make sure that you can navigate to the training and learning, and this is where you choose the category of the course that you'd like to do. So based on today's presentation, you might be interested to do a certificate course in disaster risk reduction and management. So this is where you find all the information. So you can even see there's a preview of a video that takes you through on what is covered in this particular course.
The occurrence of any kind of disaster leads to devastating consequences.
To take you through on what you expect to be covered. Alongside that, we also provide more information that is in regard to the background of the course outline, the objectives, the requirements for you to register for this course, the career destination that you might be looking at, the fee structure, and also we provide you with a quick link on how you can register. So the tuition fee, as we said, we've been able to subsidize it so that we can encourage you, we can support you to sign up with us. And that means you're going to enjoy a 10% discount if you can register for this course. So how to register? First of all, you can get the brochure. And this is the course catalog, does come with all the information. So you can find more details through these course catalog and the prospectus that we've been able to upload on the website. And here's the document, and you can always get to download it. When it comes to the process of application, how do I register for these programs? The session was very good. I'd like to further my training and also my knowledge in this area. So how do I get to register? So it's very easy for you. Make sure that you can click on that link for apply now. Once you've clicked on that link, you're going to find there's a form. There's a simple form for you to fill. So this is where you just register quickly your details. Make sure that you can type your name, your first name, your last name, your email address. Make sure that you can choose your country code and write your phone number there. Your country as well is very important so that we can know the best time to contact you, and also select the level, the course that you'd like to do. And then make sure that you can choose the level, when would you want to start the course, and then where did you learn about us, and then some few comments or maybe some remarks that you might be having. And then make sure that you can go through the terms and conditions and then submit your assignments, your application. So once you've done so, you're going to get an email from our system. And that means that is an email that would invite you now to more details in regard to the course that you'd like to do with us. And then you also have attached form. So that is the form that now you need to provide more details for you for your application process to be initiated. So that form, that is what you're going to get. Make sure that you can complete it, and then you send it back to us through the email that we'll send the form to you. So once you get that, our sales team, they're going to contact you, and then they can assist you. So that is all a very easy process. And then when it comes to the website, we have very many resources. So we not only focus on just giving the courses, but we also provide you with blogs, informative content each and every day. So very many areas that we've been able to write about. So you can always come here. You can see very many pages. So go through the content, get to interact with it, and then you're going to be very much empowered through the content that we write each and every day. We also provide some publications on the same, and that means you can follow up on the same. Some of important documents. I had someone asking about the sphere standards. So we have a handbook that you can go through. You can also download it and get to interact with the full content in regard to the sphere standards handbook. So that is just one of the areas on where you can get all these information. We also post some news, humanitarian news, and you can find that information there. So a quick one as I finish, this is a request callback. You might be interested in talking to one of our facilitators, one of our experts. You have a question, you want to request for a one-on-one session. So you can always use the request callback. And this is a feature that is going to allow you to schedule a meeting on when you'd want us to give you a call. So follow the steps, and then you're going to have contacted us, and then all you have to do is to reach out to you. So as I finish the last bit of the presentation, that is on how can you reach out to us. So the contact details, as you can see them here, we have the phone number. We have 2 phone numbers, the lines that we use for communication. You can use either of them to reach out to us, and also the email address. You can find it there. As I finish, also on the social media, where you can always get information. We update the pages each and every day. Whenever we have an announcement to make, we use the social media pages as well. So through the Facebook link here, you can like our page, ensure that you can like our page so that you can be the first one to get all the notification. Secondly, on Instagram, you can also follow our page as well, and make sure that you don't miss out on any communication. Another question, how do I get the recorded version? So we ensure that we can publish the recorded version for this training on our YouTube channel. And this is where we direct you to make sure that you can subscribe, you can turn on the notification so that each and every time we upload a new recorded version of our webinar or any other content, you'll be the first person to get it. So you can even go through some of the previous that we've done, very much informative, and you're going to learn very many areas when it comes to humanitarian. Thirdly, we also have a page on LinkedIn, so ensure that you can also look out for Humanitarian Global Institute that is on LinkedIn, and also on Twitter. You can follow us at Humanitarian Global. So thank you so much for your time. That has been a wonderful session, and at this moment, we want to say that is the end of the session. And you can always reach out to us in case of any other inquiries, in case of any other question, write us an email, write us a WhatsApp message, and then we're going to respond to you. So thank you once again, and from Humanitarian Global, you have a great day ahead, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. So when it comes to the recording, within the course of tomorrow, you're going to have the recorded version and also the presentation slides for the class of today. So thank you once again, and you have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Muchami. I am a consultant and also a trainer for Humanitarian Global. And my areas of competencies are diverse, basically in WASH and also in project management and monitoring and evaluation. I'd had lengthy years of consultancy work with humanitarian organizations in the area of WASH projects, and that's basically what describes me. Yeah, in terms of efficiency, we can say that the program really was well organized, was well coordinated, and I think we managed to achieve a lot. Sometimes some sessions we could be run over by time because there is much to cover and the time sometimes is limiting. But interestingly, this is a program that we have essentially been able to cover everything that we intended to cover. When you look back at the training plan as it was, there's no single session that we have not covered adequately, as much as we had a lot of fruitful discussions within that coverage. So I can say the program was very, very efficient. Definitely, I think Humanitarian Global is an institution that applies global standards in terms of humanitarian training, and that is the reason why participants coming from different countries can actually be able to feel very, very comfortable to be able to come into Humanitarian Global, find global standards, find global knowledge, find global skills and global tools and techniques to be able to help them apply their profession in diverse organizations. So I think the choice of Humanitarian Global is surely the best bet they can have for humanitarian training.
Okay, thank you.
I would say this was successful, and of course it was a very good opportunity to